And we're live. Welcome to another episode of The Brown Boys. This is episode 6. Make sure to go check out our previous episodes. They're in a playlist on my YouTube channel. For this episode, we will be releasing on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, so make sure to go check it out there as well. For this episode, we have a very special guest. We're honored to have Professor Richard Lemarchand on our podcast. He's an associate professor at USC Cinematic Arts School and the Interactive Media Division. He's also a he was a lead game designer for Naughty Dog Studios, and he's recently authored a book called The Playful Production Process. I've linked his book down below, so make sure to go check that out. Check that out as well. Professor Richard, do you want to introduce yourself?
Well, first of all, I want to say it's a real pleasure to be with you here today, folks, and thank you so much for having me on your show. Yeah, like you say, I'm a professor in the USC Games Program at the University of Southern California, and I'm really looking forward to talking games and game development with you.
Yeah, so as you all know, video games is like an integral part of our school and our lifestyle in general. Just a few episodes back, we were talking about how integral video games are to us
Childhood
as
and
as
in
as
general.
we've grown up. Video games have been a huge part of our lives. We've at least for me, I grew up playing Mario and all
Mm.
the basic kid games and
Pokemon.
stuff like that, Pokemon,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
I mean, recently we've seen games like Among Us, Fortnite, Minecraft, all of those games, come
Yeah,
out.
yeah.
So most of our audience, they love to play these games, but they don't know that these are actually massive development projects with like thousands of engineers that can take like a huge time to build. So I know your
Right.
book goes into a lot of detail into this. So how would you describe the process of conceiving and developing a game, and how do the different facets of a large gaming studio, like the engineers, the designers, the audio, music, special effects, how do those facets all work together?
Well, of course, it's difficult to give a kind of one size fits all answer because, we talk about this thing called the game industry, but actually, there are so many different game industries, all of which kind of overlap with each other. Like the mobile industry, for example, accounts for more than half the revenue of global games. And then, AAA is quite different from the indie game industry. But one of the things I've really enjoyed about teaching in the USC Games Program has been kind of synthesizing everything that I ever learned from all of my different game development experiences into a process that almost anyone could use to develop a game. And in my book, I talk about 4 different phases of making a game, starting from nothing, starting from not even really having an idea of what kind of game you want to make. And the first phase that I talk about is the ideation phase. Now, when people talk about ideation, they often think of like brainstorming or just, coming up with ideas. But I think the real lifeblood of ideation is making prototypes, which are just little simple, sometimes they're more like toys than games to allow us to find those nuggets of gold that we're looking for when we're designing a new game. The phase after that is the pre-production phase, and I learned when I was at Naughty Dog that pre-production is really like probably the most important phase of a game's development. This is when, having decided some experience goals for the game, like roughly what kind of game you want to make, you figure out a lot more about your game by building a thing called a vertical slice. I don't know if that's a term that you've ever heard before.
No. Have
So a
you heard of
vertical
it?
slice is kind of like a good demo of the video game you want to make. Think of it like, if the video game was a cake, and it's made up of like layers of gameplay and story and other cool stuff, art and audio and animation. The vertical slice is like a wedge of the cake. And it kind of gives you a sense of what the whole game is going to be like without you having to build the whole game. You don't have to eat the whole cake to know what it tastes like. You can just eat one slice of it, right? So
It's like a
that's
blueprint,
one.
kind of.
Yeah, well, but it's more than a blueprint because you can actually play it. But it does. You're right.
Right.
You're right, Jahnu. It kind of acts as a blueprint because it gives you a template for the rest of the game. And then in my book, I talk about this thing called the game design macro, which is kind of a simplified game design document. And that's what allows you to move into the third phase, which is full production. Armed with this plan of the macro and the vertical slice, then you can make a schedule and schedule out everything that you've got to make in full production to make the game. And then the last phase is post-production. That's when you've completed your game and now you can just polish everything to perfection. So, I mean, this is how we teach students at USC Games to begin to figure out how to plan a project. But of course, when you get to the expert level, when you're working in the industry, there's so many other considerations. And I always say there's no one right way to make a game. You've got to work out what kind of process is going to work well for the kind of game that you want to make.
Yeah, I think That's a really interesting and detailed answer.
Yeah.
I mean, I think for us to like for us playing the game, we don't really
Hmm.
understand how much
Like how
work goes
difficult
into
it is
like
to make the game. Yeah.
planning the game. Thinking about the storyline, the cutscenes, all of that. It's
Yeah.
tremendous work, and there's a lot of like
Yeah.
moving parts that go into putting that together.
Like I can
Yeah.
imagine games like God of War must be so much work to make because they have so many cutscenes.
Yeah, a huge amount of work. I've actually got a lot of friends over at Sony Santa Monica, and
Okay.
they're sort of a sibling studio to Naughty Dog in some way. We had a lot of friends between those two studios, and yeah, all of that careful work that goes into the planning of the performances, the writing of those scenes, then the integration of the cutscenes into the gameplay, because you always want to make those things like as integrated as they can be.
So yeah, as a professor at USC, what are some of the most common questions you get about careers in game design by students or people in general? And how do you think what's the best way for one to pursue a career in game design?
Well, just like there's no one right way to make a game, I always think there's no one right way into making games for a career. Except I think that the thing that unites us all is, just some experience, even a little bit of experience in actually making games is really, really valuable. And we're really lucky because today, we have all these incredible tools like Unity, Unreal, Game Maker that can allow you to start making a game really quite easily. And I think that no matter what kind of role you want to have in the game industry, and there are so many different roles, right, in game development, in all the business around running live ops for a game like an online service. There's everything to do with like the marketing of a game, community management. There's so many different careers in games, but even having a little bit of experience of making a game yourself at some point in your career. I think especially for folks who are still in high school or even before high school can be really super valuable, kind of give you a sense of what it's truly like to make a game.
Yeah, so recently Facebook renamed themselves to be called Meta. I'm sure all of our users have seen like
Mm.
so many
Hmm.
ads about
Yeah.
that Meta ad for Facebook. Honestly, it gets pretty
Yeah,
annoying.
yeah.
I've seen it like 20 times. But
Mhm.
do you think this vision of like a metaverse is realistic? And I think about it like, like Ready Player One, that's something sort of like closely resembles the metaverse. And how
Yeah.
will
Yeah,
gaming
yeah.
benefit from, this idea of a metaverse?
Well, I mean, to answer the last part of your question first, I think it would be great if we had a way of kind of going into a virtual space and just connecting with people more easily, right? That's the dream, yeah, that I can just log on, find my closest friends, see what they're doing, join them in the games they're playing or whatever kinds of social activities that they're doing. I think people would really love to have one integrated answer for that. That's what all the big companies are chasing right now, yeah? They want to see that vision from Ready Player One. I think it's arguable that we kind of already have it though, because we have all these different tools, right? All of the social media platforms, messaging platforms that we use, all the different like online game services, which are increasingly turning into like cloud gaming services where we don't even need to download the game to start playing it. I think we can already find each other somewhat easily. It's just that we don't have that thing where it's like all integrated into one big platform owned by one company. And to be honest, I don't know if that would actually make things better if one company owned it all, right? I think it's maybe better that it's all these different overlapping services and we find our own pathway through it. So it's certainly going to be interesting to see like what's going to happen around this in the future.
So a lot of these games that creators make, they revolve around like stories, and they have like some kind of storyline, right? Like for example, God of War,
Yeah.
like it was about Kratos killing Zeus. So how
Mhm.
do game designers come up with these ideas, and like how do they make these storylines, and why is it so important for them to make storyline for these games in the development stages?
Well, I really like your question because it's something I've been thinking about a lot. Actually, when I joined the game industry in the early '90s, I kind of came into games as a massive fan of games. I particularly loved like action games. I'd grown up on arcade games, home computer games, and but I was also a massive fan of storytelling, right? And I was a film buff. I love to watch all kinds of movies, from action movies to art house movies. I love comics, and I've always read a lot of fiction, literary fiction as well as like science fiction and fantasy. So I always saw video games, which at that time, in the early 90s, were really accelerating, especially in terms of the graphics and the sound, and the kinds of things that we were suddenly able to do were really mind blowing. And I really saw video games as an emerging art form, just like the movies or comics. And one that had particularly great potential around storytelling. So I feel very lucky that over the course of my career, the kinds of games that I got to work on had more and more opportunities to do good storytelling. And I always trace things back to the game Soul Reaver. That was the first time that I worked with Amy Hennig, who's super well known as the game director of the first few Uncharted games. And Soul Reaver was kind of this gothic fantasy set in a post-apocalyptic kind of steampunk world. It was about a vampire warlord who had kind of fallen from grace and was trying to figure out what had happened to him. And so we went all in on trying to work out how to do better cutscenes with better animation. Amy's an amazing writer, so of course we put a lot of effort into like writing a good story. When game designers start talking with each other about story, we often get into a lot of debates. And I do think that not every game needs a story, right? There are many games, maybe esports games are a good example.
Like Call of Duty, for example.
Yeah, for example, Call of Duty. Yeah, you don't really, in a round of online multiplayer Call of Duty, it doesn't really have a story in the traditional sense of like a 3-act story that follows a protagonist and we see them undergo some personal growth as they do battle with their demons. But definitely I think that every video game does have a kind of narrative. And there's a little bit of a difference for me between a story and a narrative. A story has a definite ending and usually a moral in the tale. And we do see the hero battling some demons and going through some growth. I think a narrative is something that every human being sort of makes up a narrative about their day, as they go through their life. And, you go down to the store to try and buy something and they haven't got it. And so you come home disappointed. It's not a very interesting story, but it's a definite kind of narrative. And I think that when we do play a round of Call of Duty, the round has a kind of narrative shape, right? Where the players come together and one player is super skilled and but then they make an error of judgment and that allows a different player to kind of win out at the end of the day. So I think all games have a kind of narrative shape. And for me as a game designer interested in story, it's figuring out how to match up those inherently narrative properties that all games have, from chess to basketball, with the kind of traditional storytelling that follows the fortune of a hero or a group of characters to find out how to make something truly transcendent. And I think it has a lot to do with learning how to tell stories in traditional media, like a book or a movie or a comic, and then applying those kinds of lessons about story structure and about character and about how characters relate to each other, bringing all of those to the form that is video games. And then that's when you end up with amazing games like God of War,
It's kind of a lot of things that make it's not like it's not one story. It's kind of like multiple things that factor into it.
Yeah, and when you start learning more about storytelling, and there are loads of really great books about storytelling. For anyone who wants a good starter book about storytelling, I think a book called Save the Cat by a screenwriter and screen doctor called Blake Snyder. Save the Cat is a really good starting point. It's quite a short book, and it focuses a lot on how stories are structured to bring out strong emotion in them. And and if you like that one, there's loads of other good books about screenwriting that you can read, and then you can apply to the design of a video game.
Yeah, I think as me and Jahnu have been applying to college, when we looked at USC, I think I was sort of confused as to why game design was in the cinematic arts school instead of, engineering. And obviously there is the engineering side of game design and there is a program for that. But especially in the cinematic arts school, as I looked into the program itself, it was interesting that it went in depth into sort of the more storytelling aspect of game design and how you're trying to tell a story much like that of a film or a TV show, and how game design is really integrated into that part of storytelling rather than just coding and
technical
programming.
side of
So
it.
the
And I
technical
want to
side of it.
emphasize that actually the overall USC Games program is really evenly balanced between the engineering school that offers an amazing set of computer science degrees with a specialization in games. I teach a lot of those amazing students. And then like the other major half of the program is, as you say, it's in the School of Cinematic Arts. And both these programs were founded really early, when there weren't many other game programs around at all in North America or even in the world. And the two programs are so beautifully integrated. We bring the students from the two schools together from the very beginning of their education. They start building board games and card games at first, even before they start making digital games. Because if you design a board game, you can really focus in on the principles of game design that are common to all games. I think we're lucky because it's like we have all of those like hard technical skills and good software design philosophy from the engineering school, the Viterbi School of Engineering, come together with the USC School of Cinematic Arts approach to storytelling and experience design. You know, the School of Cinematic Arts is the second oldest film school in the world. So we have a really deep bench of talent and experience about teaching storytelling. I think it's part of what makes our program just so special. You know, it's really great. Not to mention all the other schools that we collaborate with, like the Thornton
Yeah.
School of Music, who give us, we work with amazing musicians from there. The School of Education, the Business School. It's a really, USC Games is a really good place to be teaching.
That's all we
Yeah.
get into, hopefully.
Going more in depth into, gaming and the industry itself, I know like there are a lot of games that have just, died out after a couple of months. I mean, I like to take Among Us as an example.
Yeah, come on, that's a great example.
There was like a hype of Among Us, like it was super big for like about 2 months, and then
And then
now
just
nobody
completely
plays
die
it.
out, yeah.
So, how do game developers and people in the industry, how do they work to keep their games updated and hip
Alive,
and new for
basically.
users, alive for users to be engaged at all times?
So, I mean, this is a big question. I don't even pretend to have like all the answers around this. I do think it's interesting to reflect on the fact that a lot of people think of the game industry as a part of the tech industry. And of course, it is a super technical business, maybe one of the most technical businesses in the world, like developing a game and then standing it up and offering it as a live service and keeping that live service going without any problems. It's as big as as big of a challenge as any of the big software enterprise, problems in the world. But really, I think that at the end of the day, the game industry is actually part of the entertainment business. And so, it has the same kind of challenges that any entertainment business has, whether that's the movie business or the music business. It's a very hit-driven kind of business. And it's very hard to be able to tell ahead of time exactly what is going to be a hit. It's like, why were the Beatles such a massive band? Of course, they were immensely talented musicians, but also there was something in the air at the time, right, that allowed them to break big in America as well as in Europe. And I think that there are just so many moving parts to what is going to make a particular video game a big hit. It has a lot to do with culture, right? It has a lot to do with where people, maybe, young people, in the case of some of the games you mentioned, but also, like the video game demographics getting older all the time. And pretty soon we're going to have a generation of retired people who've been playing video games all their life. There's going to be the opportunity to have a big hit with them as well. So I think for game developers and people in, creative leadership positions in the game industry, it's all about looking ahead to see what opportunities are coming up in the future related to things that haven't been done before, or a market which isn't being served well, like retired gamers in a few years. That's going to be a market that maybe can be catered to deliberately. It's about looking at the past and learning from the past as well, learning what kind of things allowed games to become big hits or prevented them from being big hits. There's an idea in the tech industry that it's so easy if you're offering a new app or a product or a service. It's so easy to be either a little bit early or a little bit late. And if you don't hit that sweet spot with your app, then it doesn't take off. It doesn't succeed, right? And this is why I think maybe the thing to think about most of all here is that most people who have these kind of massive successes with particular games, it's usually not the first game they've made. It's usually not even like the fifth or sixth game they've made. It's very often like the 20th game they've made. And
Right.
every time you make a game and it finds even a little bit of an audience, you learn something more about the craft of game design and about how to make it a little bit more likely that your next game is going to be a big hit. It's a really
Yeah.
good question, Aditya. I really like the question. Yeah.
Yeah, I do think that like the gaming industry in general is like a hit or miss industry. Like a
Yeah.
lot of things have to line up. Like you have to release the game so that it's like you said, it has to fit a certain niche, or it has to be
Yeah.
widely accepted, or
Hmm.
it has to cater to some need that hasn't been catered before. Like
Or it's
I don't
like
know, Fortnite.
original ideas, kind of that
Yeah,
other
like
companies
Yeah.
haven't done.
Yeah.
yeah, I think I look back to something like Fortnite Battle Royale. I mean, stuff
Yeah,
like that has been done in the past, like with PUBG and stuff like that. But this was
but they
the
had like
first time that someone had
also
taken
building
like
in
a
it, so it was original.
yeah, like a PvP Battle Royale type game. This was the first time that it really blew up to the extent. So it fit that niche and it fit it perfectly to the point
Yeah,
where
Yeah.
it blew up to
it's like
immense
still alive.
magnitude. It's still
It's
Yeah.
alive
been, yeah,
today, which
three,
I,
four
I
years,
find
and
yeah, I find
yeah,
incredibly impressive that people continue to play. But I mean, yeah, I think the next question that I had was Unity and Unreal Engine are two of the biggest platforms for game development. I think you talked about that a little before, but
Mhm.
as someone that has built games on Unity and Unreal Engine, some of my friends and people that I know have said that yeah, this is incredibly cool, but going into it has been a little challenging, and I don't really know how to get started and what to do with Unity and Unreal Engine. So is there a way for students and people trying to get into game design to sort of have an easier entry into the industry and into building games, or is Unity and Unreal Engine really the main platforms that are you know doing stuff
Well,
like this?
there are actually a bunch of other kinds of game engines that are often really good to help people get started making games. For example, like for people who are interested in narrative games, I always recommend the game engine called Twine. Twine, and this is like a free to download way of making games that just run in a web browser, and they are usually like link-based interactive narrative games. So you get some text, and then you got to make a decision. You click on a link to make the decision, and that takes you to the next part of the game. And so you can create something really quickly, and you can also create things in Twine that are really sophisticated. If you learn just a tiny little bit of scripting, you can do all kinds of cool things with graphics and sound in Twine. So Twine's a pretty good entry point. There's also other engines like I mentioned before, Game Maker, which I think is for people who haven't done any scripting or programming at all. That offers a kind of graphical user interface so that you can set up relationships, between the different parts of the game. I even think that the Nintendo games that allow you to like build levels and stuff. And of course, Media Molecules, Amazing Dreams, and Little Big Planet. These are also really good entryways, I think, for folks who want to learn more about game development but are a little bit put off. They're not quite ready for Unity or Unreal. Because a lot of the basic concepts that you would learn from these other game engines are just the same concepts that you use in Unreal and Unity. And once you've got your head around those basic concepts, then I think it makes it much easier to learn just by starting to do a little bit of scripting and eventually ending up a full-blown programmer. The last thing I'll say on this, since one of the places where we're going to be hosted is on YouTube, there are so many amazing YouTubers who have a bunch of tutorial videos for Unity and Unreal that really make it really quite easy to learn stuff. So that's another good resource, I think.
So
Yeah,
I had a
especially
question.
as
Oh, yeah.
wait,
Finish. Go
yeah,
ahead.
especially with Unreal Engine, I think that they do make it very simple. Like the idea of blueprints is it's not as hard
Yeah.
to understand as actual hand coding stuff. So it is pretty easy to get into it, and I feel like
Mhm.
with a little bit of guidance, you can really get involved into building games and making really high end games. And I definitely agree with you with the fact that like Nintendo games and like games like Super Mario Maker, they're a really great
Yeah.
segue into game development. Like my brother plays Super Mario Maker. I have no idea what he's doing because I don't play. But I mean, he's building levels and posting them for other people to play. So I guess I mean
Yeah,
he's
yeah,
doing
yeah.
something. So
I bet he's doing some amazing stuff. Like I've looked at some of that. I've watched quite a bit of YouTube Mario Maker levels, and people do some amazing things in there. And yeah, I wouldn't be at all surprised if that's a lot of people's pathway into working in the industry. You know, further
Let
down
your
the line.
creativity flow, kind of. It's a good
Yeah,
exercise for your creativity.
yeah,
So I had a
totally.
question. Yeah. So I had a question that, from your book. So you talk about a lot about playtesting in your book. So
Yeah.
can you talk about like the importance of playtesting and how dev companies use it to improve their games and how how it plays a factor in that?
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, sort of over the course of my career, we came to realize gradually more and more just how important playtesting was. You'd be surprised that in the early days of the game industry, sometimes the only people who would playtest a game would be the developers themselves. And that's actually sort of the front line of playtesting today. You know, if I build something in my desk, first of all, I play it a little bit myself as I'm building it to see how it's turning out, and then when I'm a little bit more satisfied with it, I'll probably like call a friend over who like sits next to me in the studio and have them try it out, or someone who's walking by. But by the time I joined Naughty Dog, the whole industry was really waking up to the importance of playtesting a game with people who had never played it before, just to get a better understanding of what it was going to be like when that game ended up in somebody's home, you know, when they'd bought the game. So, you know, when I worked on the first Naughty Dog game, I worked on Jack 3. It was in the Jack and Daxter series. We ran like maybe 5 or 6 playtests, I think, with 10 people each across the course of like the last 4 or 5 months of development. And that allowed us to get a decent insight into how the game was working. And we would watch people play. We wouldn't give them any help ever. We would see when they stumbled against something, right? When a part of the game was too difficult, or when something in the game wasn't clear and they couldn't figure it out. By the time I left Naughty Dog, having worked on Uncharted 3, well, we ran like more than 20 playtests across the course of the last 4 or 5 months of development. So that was like one a week. And again, each of those playtests had 10 brand new players. So we would really see over the course of all those playtests just the game getting a little bit better and a little bit better week after week. And I know that this is still part of Naughty Dog's practice in the time between the all important alpha milestone when the game is kind of ready to be tested to the time they ship it. They just run one of these playtests every single week and they learn so much from them. And it's my
yeah,
advice always to people who are making games, you know, at whatever level. It's like, make sure that you get your friends in to play test it. People are sometimes
Yeah.
shy to show a game that they're working on until they've almost
yeah,
finished it. But that's a real mistake. You've got to start play testing it right at the very beginning.
yeah. I
Yeah, that
think
makes sense. I mean, obviously, you won't know if you have to change anything unless someone else tests it, right? Because from your point of view, you might be a bit biased, or you might not be able to tell some things. So that makes
Yeah,
sense.
you know the phrase, you can't see the forest for the trees.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
yeah,
exactly it for game developers.
Yeah,
We've played it so much ourselves, we can't really tell what it's like
yeah.
anymore. We can't be objective. So yeah.
So even for like sports and stuff, like someone who's really good at sport, they might not be able to tell if they're making a flaw because they've been doing the same thing so many times. So that's why they need a coach, right? It's kind
Yeah,
of like that, I guess.
totally. Yeah, yeah. That's the value of a coach.
yeah. I mean, I think I definitely agree that like having someone else look at it and from an objective point of view is extremely useful in terms of like reiterating through your thing. Like when I was building games, when writing my book, it was extremely helpful for like Jahnu. He looked at one of my Pac-Man games and he
Yeah,
played
I
it.
played it and the snake game
even though
too.
even though it took him like the whole night to crack the
Yeah,
level. I mean, it gave me some valuable input into how
yeah,
exactly I should proceed. So I mean, gaming industries for them to create a model that is like perfect for users to use, not perfect, but for it to be seamless interaction with the user, I think it
Mm.
requires actual people to be looking at it and constantly reiterating through it. So yeah.
Yeah, totally. And congratulations, Aditya, on your book. I was super excited to
yeah.
see that you were an author as well.
Yeah, that's. I mean, it was a journey. It was like it took me a long time to actually reiterate through that because prior to that, I honestly didn't know much about game design. I mean, I had worked a little bit in Pygame and Unity and Unreal, but I was
Mm-hmm.
not really that interested. But I mean, I did some more projects, I did some more work, and I realized that I actually love working with games and building games, and it allowed me to feel like a child again. So, I mean, writing the
Excellent.
book was a great introduction into game design, and
Very cool.
yeah.
It's kind
Yeah.
of ironic because I'm actually the better gamer out of both of us. So
Oh my god!
just
Come
saying.
on,
I'll
come
let you
on.
into one of my secrets. I I was so happy when one day Mark Cerny, who was one of my main mentors at Naughty Dog, confided in me that actually he wasn't always the best player of games, and it was something that I'd always said as well. And Mark said that he actually thinks that if you are not the best player, that actually makes you something of a better designer, certainly of games that are going to be appealing to a wide range of players, right? So, yeah, I've always chuckled about that.
So I guess you're gonna be the better designer than me then. Let me be the
Oh
better
my.
player.
Okay.
Who knows? Who knows? It
Who
depends.
knows? Who
Depends
knows?
on what
Sure.
kind of game you're designing, I think.
Yeah. I think that's all the time that we have. Thank you so much, Professor Richard, for coming
Yeah,
on
thank
our
you so much for being
podcast
here.
and for providing like such valuable insights. I think a lot of people in our school they don't really know what it takes to build games, and they might be interested, but they don't know how to get started. So I think this conversation provided a lot of
Yeah,
insights into that, and we hope to interact with you soon, if
yeah.
possible.
Thank you so much for being on.
It's been a real pleasure to chat with you both this evening. Thank you so much for having me on the show. Hi to all the audience, and yeah, let's keep in touch.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Thank you so
That'd be
much.
great.
Thank you to all our viewers. Make sure to keep being updated on later episodes, and peace
Like
out.
and subscribe. Like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.